Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Those folks, just go ahead and take your time getting food. We're just going to get underway. We have 1 hour scheduled. We have a very highly distinguished panel. We want to give them as much time as possible to talk. My name is Pat Kenny, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. General Frakley asked me just to host, so it's my privilege to do that. It's always an honor to be around the up-and-coming military leaders as well as current leaders. All three ROTC programs are housed in the college, even though, as you all know, you major all across the university. We're just the administrative home for you. So anyway, welcome everyone. I'm going to jump into this right away. You don't need to hear anything I have to say, obviously. Okay, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and I have some questions to ask, and we'll move from there. Okay? So, go first.
Great. Can you hear me on this? Yes? Okay. My name is Carrie Muhlenbeck, and I was appointed back in April as the Adjutant General for the state of Arizona. And so if you don't know what that means, it basically means that I'm the senior commander for all of the National Guard troops that are here in Arizona, both Army and Air. We have about 5,300 or more on the Army side, another 2,500 on the Air side. Collectively, as a department, I also serve as the director of the Department of Emergency and Military Affairs. So that's a state organization. I was appointed by the governor, so I became one of his cabinet members. Within our DEMA organization, we have the National Guard, but we also have emergency management. So when you see the emergencies across the state, it's our division in emergency management that is brokering that and finding resources. Sometimes they reach across to get the National Guard, as you've seen. Other times they don't, but total our forces there at DEMA run about 8,300. So happy to be here, happy to give you a different perspective on the military, get to the total force, especially on the National Guard side. So good to see everybody.
Thank you, ma'am. Greg Kreuter, I'm the 6th Fighter Wing Commander of Luke Air Force Base on the west side of town. Good to see y'all again. It's great to be here. I see you had time for a uniform change, so hopefully a little more relaxed for y'all. So Luke Air Force Base, what do? We train the world's greatest fighter pilots and combat-ready airmen. We have 113 F-35s and 77 F-16s. The F-16s are considered 4th generation aircraft, still highly relevant. The F-35 is considered 5th generation. It's the best aircraft we currently have in the inventory, along with the F-22. Those are considered our 5th gen inventory. About 7,000 airmen at Luke Air Force Base, about 18,000 with families. We also have a lot of range airspace, and so if you go to southern Arizona, a good chance you're flying under one of our ranges called the Barry M. Goldwater Range. And we also have Fort Tuttle, so if you qualify for any kind of military benefits, go to Fort Tuttle and Flagstaff. It's a great place to go and take a break from the heat in the summertime. Looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colonel Jared Moreland. I'm the Garrison Commander at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, down in southeast Arizona. I'm a career military intelligence officer here in the Army. And my role as the Garrison Commander of any Garrison Commander at any Army base is basically to serve as the mayor of that installation, to keep that installation alive and running, synchronize and integrate services, the execution of services, power, utilities, infrastructure, you name it, in order to ensure that the rest of the base can focus on their individual tenant unit missions. And so as the two generals have mentioned, really excited and thankful to be here, to have communication with you guys this afternoon, and really looking forward to spending the next hour with you all answering questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chuck Dudick. I'm the commanding officer of Marine Corps Air Station Yuma, naturally in Yuma, Arizona. I will just briefly state the tenants that we house there: 4 F-35 squadrons, 1 MQ-9 Group 5 UAS squadron, the services, Weapons and Tactics Squadron, and Operational Test and Evaluation Squadron. About 5,500 Marines, families, civilian employees, Marines total roughly about 11,000, so not tremendously large, but we typically talk about our disproportionate contributions to the service and the department in the way of training and readiness. Manage approximately 1,800 square miles of range space, combined with the great weather and the service impetus to bring together the Marine Air Ground Task Force at least a couple times a year in Yuma. Really makes being in the state of Arizona and in proximity to these other installations a fantastic opportunity for our service. Thanks again for the opportunity today.
Good afternoon. I'm Leanne Calderwood. I'm actually the medical group commander at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. And at our installation, we host Army, Navy, We also have border control, a numbered Air Force. We have active reserve and guard unit members that we support. For the wing itself, we have a dual mission of both rescue and attack. So we have the combat search and rescue mission, and then we also have the A-10. So dual mission there, and I'm happy to be here today.
Great, thank you all very much. Also, as we go through the questions, since we're live streaming, if you get that mic right in front of you, that'd be fantastic, okay? Format's going to go like this. I'll ask a question, and we'll start with you and move down, okay? We'll start on the far right and move down. We just briefly talk. They may not all take an answer to keep it hopping along, or they may. And far be it from me to interrupt them. I won't do that. However, since we're on a university campus, we'll work hard to allow some questions toward the end as best we can, okay? First question. The U.S. has been at war since shortly after 9/11, but these efforts are winding down. What do you believe is the next chapter for the U.S. military? I'm starting with you.
Okay.
And when we can flip around, but I'm starting with you first.
No. So, and I have to admit something. How many of you are students here? Yeah, everybody. Okay. So I feel like I'm still a student at heart. I've always been a drill status guardsman, so I've always had a full-time job on the outside. Most recently, I left that full-time job in April. So I was a professor over at Mesa Community College, and I think, my dad told me I could never be a student for my whole life. He was wrong. True to form, I got these questions last night, and I sat down, and anybody take notes when they get questions? So I showed General Kruger, and he thought, oh my gosh, right? I was the nerd in school that always took notes. And so I took a lot of notes, but I'm not going to tell you all those things. On the first question, I think the way I think where I've nailed it down in terms of what can we expect, I think we can expect fast, I think we can expect technically advanced, and I think you can expect multi-domain. So if I had to express it in generic sense, decisions will have to be made faster. You're going to have to know it faster, decide it faster, and execute it faster. And I think that's probably a relationship between the other 2 points that I made in terms of technologically advanced. You've got some near peers here, China, Russia, who are moving the needle on technological advancement in terms of cyber, in terms of electronic warfare, in terms of artificial intelligence or manufactured intelligence. So there's a need to compete there. And then I think there's also this piece about multi-domain operations, right? So you're talking cyber, you're talking on the ground, in the air. I think you're getting to a point now where we're not going to enjoy air superiority like we did over the last 20 years until we start competing and moving forward. So I think there's going to be a call to get there faster, a call to employ faster, and it's important that we have these agile airmen who are ready to engage in just about any environment. And I think the piece is, and you heard General Kruger talk about the airframes that they have, the 35s, the 16s, and the 22s. They're looking for a next generation, and we've got the technology. I think the problem we're seeing, and sir, you can correct me as a pilot, I think we're trying to operationalize it, right? So from the great ideas and the great technology to now go through the machination of contracting and testing and getting it out into operational capability, I think that's where the leverage is going to be. We just got to move faster. And I don't want to copy General Brown, but I think if you listen to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and what he says about you have to accelerate change, or we're just not going to make it. We're going to lose. So I think it's faster now.
Great words, ma'am. And I think it's also important for all of us as military leaders to look back before we look forward. So anybody study Thucydides in their classes? Anybody know who he was? Raise your hand. One, couple two. So about 2,000 years ago, a guy writes down a war between Sparta and Athens, and he finds out that countries tend to go to war based on three things: fear, honor, and interest. And he also talked about a rising power challenging the standing power, or the standing power. Still, the U.S. is a dominant world power. That is being challenged from within, and China is doing a really good job of it. And they know how to not trigger the level of war, but they're undermining all the liberal institutions that we set up post-World War II. The Bretton Woods agreements for free trade, security, the World Trade Organization, the UN, NATO, and others, they're undermining that. They're undermining the fiscal system reliant on the dollar that currently exists, and they're doing it in an exceptionally subversive way. There are two types of companies in the U.S., those who know they've been hacked by China and those that don't know they've been hacked by China. And that is the world in which we live. So we got to get ready for what that competition looks like as the dominant power. As China rises throughout history, when that happens, you get conflict. Not every time, but more often than not, history has proven that to be the case. So how do we ensure a rise of China that does not generate conflict? And one of the ways to do that is to have a strong military arm. Throughout history also, any good diplomatic maneuver has been backed by a strong military. And so that we need to be that military. And so for the Air Force part, working with Space Forces and other joint teammates, we have to be able to dominate in the air and able to make sure that we can overcome any access issues we have, specifically in the Pacific. Granted, I'm talking about China. They've been watching us for 20 years in the Middle East. We got really good at certain types of warfare in the Middle East for 20 years, and we put other things on the back burner. Those other things, in terms of high-end fights, which is what General Brown wants us to get after in the Air Force, are going to be what we need to win. It's new technology. It's new ways of thinking. It can't be the old waterfall acquisition program where you want a toy, and in 12 years they'll give you a toy, but by then the conditions have changed. It's no longer relevant. So that's what innovation means. It's not just ways to save money and total quality management and continuous improvement. You remember from the 80s? If we're going to win our nation's wars in the future, we have to be able to innovate, change the way we think. We have to trust our airmen. We have to use elements of mission command, give them the tools they need quickly, rapidly, get out of their way and let them employ. And that's what you're going to be walking into for the next 20 years in your career. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. So I'm just going to spend just a minute. So right now, the Army, some of you heard me say this earlier this morning, is going through its largest modernization efforts since the Vietnam War. And the pace at which we're modernizing across the force, as you know, the past 20 years we've spent on coin counterinsurgency operations, and those operations are not relevant or valid for us as we look at those peer and near peer competitors of China, Russia, and a few others. So the Army, and that's what I can really speak to, is really trying to accelerate, just like the General just mentioned, our acquisition processes, but also those things where we've recognized there are significant gaps in how we can do business. One of the things a couple of you, or some of you have heard about earlier today is long-range precision fires. Our ability to sense deep and see the enemy deep, where areas right now we know we can't get there because UAV assets, aviation assets, intel assets on the ground can't see that deep into the enemy's rear areas. And so figuring out how do we do that and all the things that go along with that modernization effort is really what the Army's focused on right now. And so that's going to cause a culture shift in how we've done business for most of us for the past 2+ decades, and how you're going to be doing business here in the future, because our past 20 years are behind us, and now we've got to focus on the future. So I know we'll be talking about some more things today with Russia and China, and look forward to continuing to have that dialogue with you.
Anything down in the end? Okay. All righty. Thank you very much. Second question, why don't we start this one down at the end and we'll come this way. How's that, okay? Another fairly large, open-ended question. Give you a lot of room to talk. Strategically, could you discuss America's interest in the Asian Pacific theater, in Europe, and in Russia moving forward?
Yes, so for our role for the military, I see that we need to have continued partnership development, as was mentioned earlier, with Russia and China carrying out activities below the level of armed conflict. A lot of it is our partnerships and the views that other countries have of us and whether or not they side with the U.S. or side with China for our partnership. So for example, if you look across Africa and you look historically over the past 20 years, at the beginning of that time, a lot of African countries were in support of Taiwan's sovereignty. But as China has come in and given them infrastructure, provided them economic development, almost every single country in Africa now, I think it's everyone now, in open media now sides with China on the issue. And so a lot of that is state actions but also for the military continued exercises. If you see in the media, we've had increased exercise presence in that, and part of that is to show our force that we do have a strong military to stand behind our civilian government.
Yeah, I absolutely concur with the framework that was just offered. Presence matters. Global leadership absolutely matters, and you can't do that from afar if you are not present, quite frankly. So whether that means forward positioning in terms of host nation alliances in Japan or in Australia or the Marianas or wherever else we're talking about, or whether that's freedom of navigation type activities, the basic concept of being present to offer incredible deterrence, credible support and reassurance to our allies is exactly the precise role that I think that we undoubtedly have to play. And it's going to take all of the efforts and all of the activities that were offered in the first question. Credibility, capability, the emergence of the joint force to ensure that we can in fact offer that confidence, that deterrence, and all that is otherwise required to simply be a leader, quite frankly, in the region. Thanks.
So one of the great things about being in our military is the education opportunities. Just a few years ago, I got to spend a year up in Newport, Rhode Island at the Naval War College. And so, Army War College has Navy folks there and Air Force veteran or officers as well. And so you get to learn that different perspective. And so we spent a lot of time during that year focused on China and Russia and the way ahead for the United States and our partners and allies. And it's not an easy answer. At the end of the day, our interests are everywhere, and those of our adversaries or potential adversaries are also everywhere. And so we have to figure out how to counter their efforts to cause us to lose, some of the value of those interests that we have, especially in Africa, Asia, and Europe, as we see those powers growing again. Most of you have taken a look at some of the things that China's been doing. I mean, they've even been building islands from scratch to create areas that they can now claim sovereignty to. And so those are the things that we're focused on, that we're trying to learn about, that we're trying to counter in order to ensure that China's encroachment doesn't continue to find its way to areas that now blocks us out from what we've had, you could say, dominance over the past 30, 40 years at a minimum.
Thank you very much. So my job entails keeping track of 1,200 faculty in my college. I've never seen this kind of organization where they cover the topic quickly and sometimes pass. That would never happen if I was in front of an academic crowd. They would all still be focused on the first part of the first question, I have to tell you. So anyway, third question, a lot of technological advances both in the military, this was touched on a little bit earlier, but also in the U.S. economy. All of this is changing at a quicker pace than ever in U.S. history. You've probably seen some of those data, how quickly things come to market, how quickly they're changing. Okay. How are you preparing for these changes in terms of training and implementation? It's really relevant for this young crowd. Let's start in the middle this time, Colonel, if that's okay with you, and we'll come to the right. Start with Mel.
Sure. So the biggest thing that we're recognizing right now in the Army is that we're not currently structured to appropriately manage the technological advances and really take ownership of them. Our processes are kind of mired down in bureaucracy, and one of the things we're focused on doing right now across all the services is trying to figure out how to break that paradigm of the old method of procurement and acquisition that allows us to take advantage of these technological breakthroughs. As General Kreuter mentioned, if we go through our normal process and it takes you 10 to 12 years to get the product on the street, by that point it's absolutely irrelevant. Everyone else has moved on to include industry, and our military then would be lagging behind. So it's really focusing our efforts on how do we get better, how do we improve our processes and procedures to innovate, to ensure that we have the ability to stay current with our peers who are not necessarily stymied by that same bureaucratic process that we have when it comes to when you think about contractors, and everything else that allows us to do what we need to do to get important assets in the air, on the sea, on the ground. And that's really our biggest leap, is going to be changing how we do business as a Department of Defense in order to ensure that those systems are no longer, coming in 5 years after they're needed.
Awesome. Great words. Thank you. I'll just pile in quickly from our perspective as well. So we talked acquisition, and you did a great job of articulating that. A lot of people watch movies like Transformers, and they'd assume that the Air Force has all those toys today. And I want to go reach into those movies and pull that into our wing. But the bottom line truth is, aside from some of our most advanced things that you see, a lot of our stuff is just old. Backbones are old. Old telephone lines, with dial-up is the way to think of a lot of our technology. And we need to be able to go to war with stuff like this. And so we don't have time to spend 10 years figuring out what that next technology is that's obsolete by the time it comes off the line. And so how do we do that? Well, we partner with industry, and we get them on board. The military-industrial complex that was post-World War II is very well entrenched, but they are listening to our needs, and it takes a long time to shift the conversation. But one of the ways we do that is if you look at a large acquisition, I'll just, the F-35 is an example because I have it at the wing. The acquisition of that is actually only a small part of the actual tail of what it costs. So you only spend about 10 to 20% on acquisition of a thing, in this case the F-35. About 80 to 90% of the actual cost of that is in sustainment. And so what Dr. Roper, previously he was in charge of acquisition, is trying to do, and what we're trying to do is flip that around. And we want to spend the majority of our money on acquisition of new technology with the plan not to keep it that long, and to cut off that money from sustainment and put that and invest it in new technology quickly. One of the ways we do that is working with things like AFWorks. We've got Spark Tank, working again with a lot of Silicon Valley, and frankly, a lot of you in the room, you have the best ideas. I'm old, I support innovation, but I try to set up the construct and get the heck out of the way, because the best ideas are going to come from folks like you that are going to help us innovate. And on the software side, the same thing. Anybody use DTS? You guys in ROTC ever go TDY yet? Yeah. Right? Horrible. Absolutely horrible. Well, that's what you get through the acquisition, right? You say in 10 years I want this, and this is what it looks like. But we need a DevOps mindset. Developer and an operator sitting together. So I might want a Porsche, but I'd have to wait 20 years to get that Porsche, and then by then Porsches are obsolete. Instead, I'm going to give you a skateboard, and you're going to get moving forward. And then you're going to tell the developer next to you, well, that skateboard's good, but I could use a handle up here. He'll give you a handle so you can steer a little better. And then how about motorize it a little bit? So now I can go a little bit faster. And then it'd be a scooter, and then a car later on. And so you get something that's useful right now that we can then improve upon and have the warfighter in the end throughout this process not just get something closer at the end of those 10 years of what they actually need, but throughout it, they had something that was useful the entire time, incrementally developed. And so those are things we need to do. We also need airmen, in our case, and guardians for the Space Forces that can think dynamically, that are multi-capable. We're no longer going to be able to project power. And if y'all look at in the Middle East, we'll be there in a month. We're going to build our forces. It's going to take a month, and there's nothing you can do about it. That won't be the case if we're challenged by China or Russia. We have to think of agile combat employment. We have to think about going to small places with small footprints and have trust and confidence of the airmen and mechanics there to turn jets, load bombs, and to do that quickly and to move on. A completely different mindset in order to change the calculus with those that we may have to compete with. Thank you, ma'am.
No, and I think those, all points, and so everybody active duty here, right? Okay, so from a guard perspective, right, or there's a reserve component perspective, little different considerations, because typically, what do they give the guard and reserve? The leftovers, right, or the shit nobody wants, right? I mean, at the risk of offending, that's really the bottom truth. I mean, you look at our tanker unit, KC-135s, what's our tails there are built in the 50s? How'd you like to get on those planes? I mean, I think they're better than the commercial fleet that's out there, and I trust our crew chiefs, but I think the struggle for the Guard especially is, here you're modernizing the active forces, how now are we going to modernize or keep the reserve and the Guard at pace? So if there is this big all-hands-on-deck encounter, right, you want to draw back into the reserves because you can't employ forces without us. I mean, that it's just the sad truth. We're not going to win a war if we're only fighting with our active duty folks. So do you want your Guard and Reserve to be playing with the Tinker toys? I don't think so. I don't think you do. And so it's always an interesting question now when the Guard comes forward and says, hey, can you give us some of the shiny new toys? We don't want all of them, but it'd be nice if we have some of them. And I think the bigger piece for us, I think the Guard is lucky in some respect in terms of recruiting, in terms of getting the talent. So I have airmen and soldiers for 1 weekend out of the month, 15 days out of the year, and if we can pull them on orders extra amount of time, that's great. If we're going to deploy them, that's great. But then after those times when I own them, they go back to their civilian jobs. And so the civilian world sometimes outpaces the military world. So if we can get the cyber smarties, right, that are working at all the different companies and bring them into our cyber command center here that we've just stood up in partnership with the governor and the Department of Homeland Security here in Arizona, then that's a win for us. And so what we do is in the Guard, we try to leverage folks who are super smart in their full-time jobs, but then still have a desire to serve and come and perfect those skills and put those skills to work on behalf of the country and the nation and obviously the state of Arizona. So I think modernization and keeping up with technology is always a struggle in the Guard and Reserve, especially when you're not necessarily getting the shiny new toys. So just another perspective to throw out there. And I would encourage you all to read the Constitution as well when it talks about armies, right? The language is we raise an army, which means what? We don't have a large standing army. Yeah, 1636, right? Yeah, okay.
Colonel.
I'd like to take just a second to add on to the points that the general's made and would offer that that type of creative thinking in terms of manpower management, talent acquisition, and retention is not explicitly limited to just the Guard or the Reserve forces, but rather a comprehensive review of just how we're managing our manpower in total across the active forces as well. Within the last week, the Commandant of the Marine Corps released a subsequent phase of his overall force design and vision for the service, in which he offers previously thought to be inconceivable, notions of how we manage our manpower, and mention things like, for example, service members vacillating between the civilian sector and active sector. Maybe they come on, they go to the basic school, they earn a initial skill set, be it an infantry officer, a pilot, probably not a great example, just in terms of whether or not they're going to ebb and flow. Maybe it is. But the point ultimately being that where previously there would be prejudice or jeopardy against allowing someone to exit the service to come back in later on, maybe that's exactly what we need to be doing. Maybe they transition to the civilian sector, refresh some of those skills or refresh some of the education that they previously had to come back in, to maybe even vacillate back out a second time. But nevertheless, as we look at evolving technology and exactly as the general offered, we have to necessarily, of course, have the talent and the skill set to match that technology. And maybe the way we do that is to leverage the civilian sector in unconventional ways. Thanks.
So I'm going to take a stance from medical and tell you sometimes technology is not your friend. So over the past 20 years for medical, we have had tremendous success rates in saving members' lives and getting them back to the United States, which our nation has come to depend on, that if you're in battle, we're going to save your life. But when we look at agile combat employment and we're going to send 200 airmen to this forward operating base or Marines or soldiers, we're not going to have a full surgical unit there. They're not going to be back to a full up roll 3. So actually in the medical community, we're kind of having to take a step back and retrain our medics and retrain our airmen that are multi-capable airmen in the basics of life-saving capability, putting tourniquets on. Previously, we would use a lot of single-use items because we had unrestricted access for resupply. So if we wanted to start an IV, we've got the plastic throwaway tubes. We had unlimited blood supply. We could get those supplies in. Where now we're having to retrain our medics that are used to having this technology at home in their hospital. How do they operate when they are out at a forward location without this technology? So we're kind of having to go back, and it's out of their comfort zone because that's what they're used to, and of course they want all that information. So just another side of the consideration.
Thank you very much. This question here is directly relevant for all of the aspiring and up-and-coming young leaders here. So to established leaders, please identify the key characteristics you look for when identifying future leaders in America's military. We're going to start on this side.
I wrote them down. I think I'm going to change my mind. So I think there's a combination for me. I'm looking for the service ethos. I'm looking for individuals who are really called to serve. So many times I meet with individuals, or I have girlfriends and their husbands, and they ask me, hey, my son or daughter wants to join. And then I meet with them and they say, well, what can I get from the Guard? Right? What education am I going to get? What health care am I going to get? What pay am I going to get? And I said, okay, wait a minute. Right? Let's turn it around. Right? So that's usually a sign off the top. Not so many me's. I look for a service ethos and something. I hate to break it to y'all in uniform, but you realize you're not going to make your first million by joining the military, right? I mean, you might on the outside if you're really good at day trading, right? But I think there's got to be a bigger reason for why you do it, and so I look for that. And if I'm looking for goosebumps when the national anthem plays, or I'm looking for, bumps in the throat, and you're having a hard time choking through when you talk about how much the organization means to you or your country means to you. So I definitely look for a service ethos. I look for integrity, and that's a difficult one to get after. But I always tell folks, the integrity is yours. Once you lose it, it's really hard to get back. So you got to say what you mean. You got to mean what you say. You've got to tell the truth. You've got to always give your best efforts. And I think I'm also looking for a little bit of humility. So I'm looking for the man or the woman that can go into the room and is okay not being the smartest person in the room, right? The one that's willing to learn, the one that's willing to take a step back and see what the other experts might have to offer. So I think humility, integrity, and probably service it's a triad for me, I suppose. I don't know that I can pull it down to one, sorry.
And that's great. I mean, I can't top that. I'll just offer something that we actually changed our weapons school. So if you know what Top Gun is for the Navy, the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, about 15 years ago, they took a hard look at what kind of leaders they wanted to build in terms of, in this case, fighter pilots. And they found actually, you think of fighter pilots, they're cocky, they're all about themselves. And that's, the persona you see in the movies. But actually, our best warriors are humble, they're approachable, and they're credible. They know how to do their job. That's why they are where they are, but they don't need to prove it to you every day. They're approachable in the sense that you want to go to them with your problems, your challenges, the things that you're embarrassed to bring up, right? You want to go to them. They're approachable, and they're humble. They know they can do the job. It's not what they're doing, though, when they interact with you is showing you how good they are. They want you to be the best leader you are. And so from a tactical fighter standpoint, that actually applies even in there. I'm trying to teach somebody how to dogfight. If it's all about Freddie not getting gunned and me gunning the student all the time, am I really teaching the student? Are they learning anything? And if I'm a jerk about it, are they going to want to talk to me about their questions or problems in a debrief? Or is it going to be, nope, no questions? So we found that actually translates to what we're looking to build in leaders. And ma'am, integrity first, our first core value. You nailed it there. We need that. That's a one-shot shotgun. And you can't really reload it, usually within the length of a career if it's pretty bad. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you.
So I didn't write these down after they spoke, I actually wrote it down before. But you'll find the same themes, right? So those of us that have been doing this for, all of us have been doing this for 20 plus years, you start to see the same threads and themes that really are important as you focus on leadership. And so I'm just going to rattle them off. I wrote down humility, enthusiasm, flexibility, a desire to serve others, to be part of something bigger than themselves, and integrity. So pretty much touched on already by both the generals, but that's what we need. At the end of the day, that is what, allows you to serve others, to be a qualified officer or non-commissioned officer that's leading soldiers, that's taking care, or all of our service members, taking care of their families, taking care of their future progression, because none of us have gotten here without the help of all of our other teammates. We've got an incredible table right here in front of you of senior non-commissioned officers and officers that have also gotten to where they are in the military because of the help from others. Right? If you focus just on yourself, you will never get to where your goals or end states are. But as you build teams, you'll find it's amazing what you can do if you really look at the values and other things that teammates can add to what you're trying to achieve. So I'll just leave it at that. But there's a million other adjectives you could throw out there, but those are the ones to me that I've focused on over 20-plus years that I think are really valuable. And if you've got them, then you've got a good, solid foundation, and everything else you can focus on and learn from there.
All those points are certainly tough to add on to, but I'll just leverage the last comment that was made regarding the team. And I somewhat referenced a little bit earlier today, but I genuinely believe that it's important for everyone and all the organizations to know their place in the hierarchy, for lack of a better term, to know what their role is. Certainly when the general is dropping a bomb on a Dempy downrange somewhere, a whole lot of stuff had to happen, way back before that. From the maintainers to the ordnance airmen to the controllers to Transcom, getting them to the fight, so on and so forth. So just kind of having an appreciation for what our specific role is. By all means, be the best at whatever it is that you're doing, make no mistake. But at the same time, not everyone is going to be the fighter pilot. Not everyone's going to be, whatever it is that you would otherwise, envision for being the tip of the spear, or whatever it is that you aspire to. The only couple other things that I would offer is that I think we all, deep down naturally recognize that there's got to be a will to fight in some way, shape, or form, to be resilient, to acknowledge that you're going to get smacked in the mouth once in a while, or you're going to have a loss or a casualty or something tragic happen in the family, or just something that you have to work through. And so are your soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, make no mistake. But that level of resiliency that you either have already or work to build individually or organizationally is certainly part of it. And then my last comment, quite frankly, is I personally like those that embrace the idea of meritocracy. That if you show up, doesn't matter where you came from, what you did yesterday, what you did 20 years ago, who your mom or dad are, makes no difference. If you show up, bring your A game. If you're the contributor, if you're the warfighter that's going to make the difference, you will be elevated in your organization if that's your choice. But at the same time, it's team ball through and through. And I don't know. I'm just exceptionally confident and, quite frankly, motivated and inspired by the collection of everyone here today and the comments that have been offered, because I think that we're true to our core for the duration of all of our careers to date, and are excited for you all going forward. Thank you.
You sure? Okay. All right. We have about 15 minutes left. I got a lot of students here. If it's all right with you all, I'd like to take some questions. Okay, great. And we have some people that are going to move a few mics around for us, I think. But if not, please, if we don't get you one, stand up and give us a good voice. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Kinevi. I have a question for Colonel Moreland. What challenges has what sort of challenges in the arena of intelligence have the artificial islands in the South China Sea prevented in your eyes?
Could you repeat that?
Challenges has the
What sort of challenges specifically in the branch of intelligence have the artificial islands built by China presented?
So I would say I don't think the islands have presented any intel challenges. I mean, we know they're there. We have the assets and capability to keep our eyes on them and as we watch them grow. I think the challenges are, what is the long-term goal? What is the end state of what China is doing? And what it's really doing is it's impacting our freedom of navigation within areas that were formerly international waters, where we had the ability to patrol, and now, are you within their restricted zone off of the coast of what they're considering part of their sovereign territory that keeps you at bay. You no longer have the ability to get within so many miles of that section of the South China Sea. And so, what we really have to focus on is while that's going on, what I will tell you in intel right now, one of our biggest problems is the volume of information that's out there, right? And there's a difference between information and intelligence, right? Information is everything you can get your hands on. Intelligence is when you apply some sort of analysis to that, whether you correlate it with something else that gives you additional information that by itself doesn't really mean much. And so I will say, in the issues with China and the South China Sea, we're just simply focusing on what don't we know, What are we trying to get ahead of and figure out what the adversary is trying to do so that we can counter that instead of always being reactive to something they've already done. But we want to be able to get ahead of what they're trying to achieve and maybe block them in some way that allows us to continue to maintain that freedom of navigation through the Navy, through the Air Force, in the sky, and everything else that we're challenged with right now. But I don't think the building of those islands is creating intelligence challenges. It is potentially making it a little bit harder, though, to figure out what their total end state is and stop that before they get too far.
Anybody want to add to that? That's good. Another question? One right there. Next.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. This is for the adjutant. Ma'am, I spent 21 years in the Army National Guard, retired back in Nebraska, and I noticed the ramp up as I was retiring in 2012 of the usage of National Guard troops. The difficulty of trying to be an employer of National Guard troops in today's landscape. What are the National Guard thoughts on how do we continue to have this balance for raising up these troops and maintaining all the things that are going on in the civilian world for these National Guard troops? So thank you, ma'am.
So my thoughts are, I agree with you. I think the balance is essential to what we do. And so you've seen that, especially now as we've come off the COVID mission. That'll ramp down into December. We're in the middle of the Southern Arizona law enforcement mission right now for Arizona. So we're allowed up to 250. We've only got about 160 on mission right now that are going to backfill for the crisis at the border to address those secondary and tertiary effects. We did the standby mission for civil disobedience. We actually deployed some to Wisconsin. There's the wildfires that we take care of. There's the flooding that we take care of. So yes, it's almost like you're juggling 6 different balls, and then you're also trying to fulfill all the federal deployment requirements. And I don't think we've missed one of those. In fact, I know we haven't. Sergeant Major's going to shake his head over there. Throughout this whole time, during the whole conflating of missions. And so I think you're absolutely right, balance is the key. And I think education is probably a bigger key. And I think we have to honor our employers. And so the interesting piece about the Guard is we tend to be the cheaper alternative. I don't mean in terms of people and equipment, but in terms of the pay and allowances. So if you think about it, who pays your dwell time if you're a guardsman? The employer, right? The employer is paying for those things. And who saves a spot for you when you come back? The employer. So it really is. I think we've fought the war this last 20 years on the backs of the employers. When we go out and do these missions in the state, we've done it on the backs of the employers. And I think what you'll see collectively with the adjutants general across the 54, the states and the territories, is that there's this idea that the core mission of the Guard, and I think they've shown up since 9/11, is really to be the combat reserve, not necessarily the strategic reserve. And so if we want to maintain those capabilities, there are some domestic missions that don't always align, driving buses. There are some things that we might want to push back on unless we can get after training and leverage training in terms of collective skills, in terms of a transportation mission. If we've got to drive trucks, we might as well pull a truck that's got things, loaded to the back that we can deliver somewhere. So I think to the extent that we can combine what we're doing in the state that also fulfill certain core tasks, both on the Army and air side, that's the balance we have to get after. And boy, if you've got a solution, please come see me, because I think every adjutant general before me has struggled with it too. So good point. And I think the bigger point is that you said it, and that we get people to recognize that it's always a balance. So thank you. You can come and sit in my seat. Yeah.
Other questions?
Make sure you stand up. Hello, my name is Cadet Valentine, and this is kind of a question for the whole entire panel. So I really want to ask, a lot of time we're talking about fast decision making and being able to work together with the joint tasks and the joint forces. So my question is, how can we maintain cohesion? How can we maintain cohesion between our organization and the joint forces as a collective?
I'll just start briefly on that one. The way you maintain cohesion is to have it to begin with. And so it's all about relationships and building teams at the end of the day. So see a bunch of different uniforms up here. If we were in an AOR on the other side of the world and we're getting ready for an operation, The time to have those relationships ready to rock and roll is not when the flag goes up. And so it's important that we already know each other. In fact, a lot of us go to the same colleges and schools together, and education. We'll get to know each other or work on the staff together, or go to training exercises together, deploy together. But you need to build those relationships and teams in advance. And so if you do that, you build trust. And trust is a really important word that I just want you all to think about. And it's related to when the general was talking about integrity. You can't have one without the other, right? So if you build trust amongst your joint force teammates, and you know our services compete for money and budgets, that's not our problem. Our problem is how do we integrate our forces together, do joint fires integration to reach the commander's objectives. And so to maintain those relationships, you have to have it to begin with. If you don't know the folks you're going to be side by side with when you have to go to war, it's too late, because the pressures that you're under to execute combat ops will not give you the time to build those relationships. Once you have them, you can maintain it just by being a good teammate and realize that they're under the same pressures you are, and you're going to be competing for resources. But that's really what I would offer you all to think, is the relationship building starts now. It's a great question.
Anybody else want to add? No? Okay. Right here.
I have no original thoughts.
Oh, okay. I'm Air Force brat, so and I'm with ASU News. I read a lot about China in the news. Heard about this hypersonic missile. Read this past week about 1,500 silos being built in China. But what I don't read about is what are we going to do about it? Are we doing anything to prevent them from building these weapons? And then how are we going to defend against that?
So you know, in the world that, not my current job, but in the world that I generally live in, you know, information is generally classified, secret, top secret, whatever, right? So we don't tend to talk about those things, you know, but that's why we have across all the services good intelligence assets that are looking at those and figuring out the way ahead. You know, if we're talking about on sovereign China, you know, Chinese land, clearly there's significant issues with doing anything about it. So how are we planning to counter or protect against these weapon systems that other nations are choosing to add to their inventory? You know, we do the same thing here. You know, we have you know, enemies or adversaries that are looking at our capabilities. You know, they're copying. If you look at the new Chinese, their new 5th generation, it sure looks an awful lot like an F-35, right? And so, you know, there's copycatting that goes on, but there's also learning from those technologies to figure out how they work so that you can figure out the backwards end of how do we then counter that. You know, what is it that makes that tick? What is it special about that munition that allows us to defeat it before it can ever, you know, hit its intended target? And so there's a lot of reverse engineering and other things that have to be done. But as far as doing anything about it on their sovereign soil, I don't think there's really much we can do without, you know, instigating a war that we're not looking forward to.
Yeah, so I had a question kind of in the intelligence arena, I guess. Anybody can answer it. It's, I guess, from a intelligence gathering angle, when you're trying to, I guess, piece out, I guess, motive, right, or trajectory of what China's trying to do, right? When they have the Great Firewall, when we're trying to go in, gather intelligence, so what methodologies, like, right now would you say, like, that civilians have developed might be, I guess, prone to weakness, or like what? So I just came out of like a political psychology consortium thing with Harvard, and they said, like, we got URLs, we got like information, but we can't ever see exactly what Chinese, I guess, officials, what they're trying to find, right? So how would we piece that out?
Well, trying to guess how an adversary thinks is a really difficult thing, right? And so one of the ways we need to do it, so we have different models we tend to use. They teach us in schools, and one of the most popular one is the rational actor model. of how we think a country would behave based on what a thinking person would do. Could also look at the way organizations work together or bureaucracies interact. Bottom line, it's really difficult. And so it's really easy for us in the West to project our type of thinking on China and just trying to extrapolate what would we do if we were them. And so really to understand them, we need to understand their way of thinking. And so the West is based on a certain type of thinking. The way we hold our champions up high for forging across a river and breaking through adversity is not how the Chinese think. The way that they think is their greatest leader is actually the person that places themselves at the lowest point to where the Tao or the Shi, to use the potential of a situation, will flow. They have read the rivers and the mountains and the streams so that the result flows to them naturally. And so they're very patient, and they believe in setting conditions for success to come to them. So we need to think the way they think, not what we would do and how we would do things. And of course, again, as we were talking about in the panel, offered you some thoughts on how they operate before the level of war, and someone asked about, the islands and what they're doing there. That's pretty overt, but what are they doing that we don't see? What have they infiltrated? Where are they getting information from? Look at the One Belt and One Road, how they interact with other countries. Look at the technology they offer and the advanced data systems and the cameras and the traffic stuff. You can rob a shoe store in somewhere in the Middle East, and with their technology, they can track you down and pull you over just by facial technology and reading your license plate and knowing where you are. You'll be on the highway on the way home. They'll pull you over. Chinese developed technology, but where's all that data going, and what are they doing with it, and what is their intent? So if you want the intent for China, they have, whether or not it's the entire plan, they have a really good plan. It's called the 100-year plan that started in 50 and ends in 2050. And so their goal is to become the Middle Kingdom by 2050. And by Middle Kingdom, that you might think like the center of the Pacific. That's not what they mean. They mean heaven's up here, earth is down here, and we're going to be in between. And so you talked about our national interests earlier as well, and our vital national interests. Our vital national interests, our critical one, is always to protect the homeland and the people in it. But we also believe in free trade. We believe countries should be able to determine their own course of action. It's not necessarily consistent with someone who's saying they're over Earth. And so how they execute that intent is a difficult part, but we know their goals. They clearly state them, how to get them, but it's the how they're doing it. That's the intel problem that folks like you are going to help us solve. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Midshipman 4th Class Riley. This question is for the entire panel. Given that the U.S. is shifting resources away from counterterrorism and more toward great power competition, do you think we are at risk of losing control in the counterterrorism realm? And if so, what can we do to mitigate that risk?
So the most important thing about the military is that we're a learning organization, right? We try not to repeat our past mistakes. So while there are efforts and shifts right now to maneuver towards this peer and near peer threat scenario, we haven't given up on the coin fight. We haven't given up on the counterterrorism lessons learned. Our intel, and I'm sorry for talking intel, but that's kind of what I do. It's as strong and robust as it's ever been. Some of the situations that led or allowed 9/11 to happen and some other things since, I think we've got a better handle on them than we did in the past because we've learned from those omissions, mistakes. Some of it may just be in the formations that we have that weren't looking at things or neglecting certain areas of the world. So there's only so much peanut butter to be spread thin when it comes to the national defense budget. But at the end of the day, we're trying to do the best we can with the taxpayer funds and being good stewards of it and recognizing that we do have to focus on what's next. You can't just become stagnant, but you've also still got to keep your hands into the pot that was what you just dealt with, or you're going to have those same incidents pop up again in the future. That's really the best answer I can give is we're not completely turning off point. There are still plenty of our formations that are focused on that on a daily basis. We are still involved in the Middle East and with other areas of the globe where others mean to harm us and undermine our values, but we're also still focused on the future. We can't just focus on the here and now.
Anybody want to add to that? All right. Let me just, a couple concluding remarks. First of all, This is the Salute to Service weekend here at the university, where the university and the college are very honored and proud to host these kinds of distinguished panels, to have this many young people simultaneously striving toward college degrees, as well as becoming officers in the military. So the university is very happy to play that role. I hope you enjoy the weekend. We very much appreciate this kind of exchange, and it's a real pleasure for me to see this kind of distinguished panel back and forth with all these young people right before us. In our college, we have 29,000 students. I don't always see them dressed quite like this, so they look a little different than this, but it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. So a big round of applause for the panel. And special thanks to everyone that pulled this together. It wasn't me, I just walked in, so Kathy and Paul and General Frakely, all the IT folks that are here, the live streaming, whoever rolled out lunch. Very nice, quick round of applause for those folks. Enjoy the afternoon, and I'm sure there's more to come. Enjoy the weekend. Thanks very much.